Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the tiled belly of an empire, the kitchens of the Ottoman palace, where steam curls from ancient copper pots and oil lamps flicker low against thick stone walls. The year is somewhere between the 16th and 17th centuries, but you won't need a date. You'll know where you are from the scent of roasted lamb, rosewater, and something tangy, maybe tamarind, or pickled grape leaves, wafting through the corridors like a trail of breadcrumbs meant for dreams. You're walking softly now past silken curtains that don't rustle, even when brushed. Ahead, tall guards in tulip-stamped robes pretend to be statues, and you realize you haven't heard a single footstep since entering this place. No horses, no chatter. Just a distant clink metal spoon on ceramic bowl and the soft pulse of fire low and steady like a heartbeat. This is the heart of the Topkapi Palace, the kitchens. Or rather, the kitchens, with a capital K, because this wasn't your average soup and bread operation. At its peak, the palace kitchen complex fed over 4,000 people every day. And not just anyone royals, concubines, guards, scribes, gardeners, spiritual advisors, physicians, coffee servers, eunuchs, astrologers, and even the guy whose entire job was folding turbans. And you're here at midnight, the best time to visit. Historians still argue whether the kitchens truly operated 24/7, but one thing is certain, something was always cooking. There were over 10 separate kitchens each, with its own crew and specialization. One for soups, one for sweets, one just for pilaf, another for medicine, and the most secretive one, tucked deep behind brass doors, the helvahane, where sugary confection syrups and pastes were made. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a sugar coma, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from your bed or your couch or somewhere in between, post your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're dreaming from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk at the outer courtyard, just beyond the gate of salutation. Even now in this sleepy hour, the kitchen area is warm, oppressively so. The smell of boiling broth clings to your skin. You pass a hallway lined with marble basins, each big enough to drown a sheep in, and probably once used for that exact purpose. Steam rises from the floor in curls. There's a flickering orange glow ahead. Lanterns burning animal fat, their wicks trimmed low to keep the air from turning bitter. You turn a corner and stop. Before you stands the soup kitchen, literally ashivi in Ottoman Turkish. It's a massive vaulted hall with no seating, no tables, just fire pits and iron pots big enough to hold small children. One pot still simmers long after dinner. A sleepy cook stirs it absently, half dozing, with one hand on the wooden paddle and the other holding a warm brick wrapped in cloth, an old trick to keep fingers supple through the chill. You peer inside the pot and see a pale, milky broth, yayla çorbası most likely. A yogurt-based soup, thickened with rice and laced with dried mint, and a hint of garlic. It's soothing, sour, and oddly addictive. This wasn't just comfort food. This was military strategy. You see, the Janissaries, the Sultans' elite military corps, were notoriously temperamental about their meals. The changing of a cook or a missing spice could trigger mutiny. In 1656, a particularly watery batch of soup led to a full-blown revolt. The chef was beheaded. The Grand Vizier barely escaped with his life. So yes, this soup mattered. One of the fringe theories, whispered by a handful of culinary historians with raised eyebrows, is that this particular soup, yayla çorbası, was more than just filling. It was mildly sedating, a mix of fermented yogurt and herbs that calmed nerves and soothed ulcers. Not that we're making accusations, but wouldn't you rather have an army that sleeps soundly than one that dreams of rebellion? You glance back at the sleepy cook, still stirring, still clutching his warm brick. He hums a lullaby, probably unaware he's part of a centuries-old tradition of culinary peacekeeping. Farther down, you see workers preparing ingredients for the morning meal. There's a basket of onions the size of cannonballs, garlic bulbs, crushed walnuts, jugs of thick pomegranate molasses sticky and dark as ink. You reach out and touch a linen bag of flour. It's soft, almost silky, because the Ottomans milled it with stone wheels and sifted it 4 times for the palace. Even the bread was dressed for court. You duck into a smaller room and inhale a different scent, sweet, rich, heavy. This is the pilaf room. Rice and meat, slow-cooked in lamb fat, layered with currants and pine nuts, and saffron so potent the grains shimmer like gold. In one corner, a copper lid tilts open just enough to release a single puff of steam. You smell cloves, maybe cinnamon. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about whether these kitchens use cinnamon imported from Ceylon or the cheaper cassia bark. Some records suggest the empire was wealthy enough to use the real deal. Others argue most of the spice-labeled cinnamon was wishful thinking. Either way, the scent is intoxicating. You move slowly now, not just because you're sleepy, but because every inch of this place feels holy. Not in a religious sense, but in the way that history clings to hot stone and wood smoke and silence. You pass through another hall where shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling. Amphorae of honey sealed with wax. Earthen jars of dried herbs. One is labeled sumac in elegant Arabic script. You run your finger through the dust on the lid and imagine the sour, winey powder hitting your tongue. Another jar reads, Malep ground, cherry pits used in pastries to give them that almond vanilla flavor you can't quite describe, but never forget. The silence here is weighty. You realize there's no music, no singing. Only the kitchen master is allowed to raise his voice, and even then, only to call out the meal schedule or bless the bread. You hear a low murmur from the far corner, someone chanting a short prayer before breaking a fig in half and placing both sides carefully on a plate. Not for a person, for a painting of the prophet's sandals displayed near the dining platform of the Sultan. A symbolic gesture, but one taken seriously. You sit for a moment on a stone bench warmed by nearby ovens. You close your eyes and listen to ladles clinking to fire, crackling to distant footsteps, padding down mosaic-lined halls. And then faint but real, a single cat's meow. Palace cats, by the way, were not just tolerated but beloved. They kept the kitchens free of mice and were often named after spices. Pepper ginger, even zeytin olive. Some were rumored to have their own feeding bowls and sleeping cushions, tucked behind the warmest hearths. One chef in the 1500s supposedly left his entire coin purse to his favorite tabby, who had the soul of a vizier. You lean back smiling, letting the heat seep into your bones, and the scents lull your senses. Somewhere above the sky is black velvet pricked with stars you can't see from inside these kitchen walls. But you know they're there, watching, waiting. This night in the palace, kitchens is far from over, and neither are you. You're still warm from the stone bench, the heat of the ovens clinging to your back like a sleepy animal. When you rise again, it's slower this time, your body already giving in to the pace of the place where nothing seems rushed and everything tastes like time itself. You follow a hallway to the left, narrower than the others and dimmer too. A faint shimmer on the walls suggests humidity steam from the pots, or maybe sweat from the stone. As you walk, your fingers trail the tiles. Smooth pale blue. Iznik ceramics hand-painted centuries ago with motifs of tulips, vines, and stylized cypresses. Your steps lead you into another vaulted space, this one echoing with a different kind of quiet. There's a large cauldron in the center of the room. Next to it, a pair of ladles hanging from a hook gleaming from constant use. And nearby, just sitting there, as if it's waiting for a prince or a ghost, is a single bowl. Glazed, chipped at the rim. Still fragrant with yogurt and dried mint. This is where you learn something strange. Sometimes soup started wars. You've probably heard of the Crimean campaigns, the Austro-Turkish skirmishes, or the endless battles with the Safavids. But there's a quieter battlefield people rarely mention the imperial menu. And in particular, yayla çorbası, the same soup you saw simmering earlier. The name literally means highland soup, a nod to its Anatolian roots. But here in the palace, it had power far beyond comfort. The janissaries, those elite soldiers who lived more like monks than mercenaries, were fed from these very kitchens. And they watched the menu like hawks. Historians still argue whether the infamous Sorba Rebellion of 1622 was truly triggered by bad soup or merely used the meal as a symbol of wider unrest. Either way, the story goes that when the janissaries were served thin, bland yayla çorbası one evening, possibly without its usual mint or butter, they took it as a sign. A signal that the Sultan had grown careless, weak, and the next day heads rolled. Literally, you run your finger around the rim of the empty bowl. There's a warmth there, like memory, like something just finished, but still lingering. Your guide, imaginary or otherwise, motions for you to follow again. This time, your steps bring you outside briefly. You slip through a side door and find yourself in a narrow courtyard. There's no moon tonight, only the glow of lanterns. But even in the half-light, you can smell the difference. Spices, dry, aromatic. To your right is a low building with no windows. Just one wooden door, half open. Inside, you see shelves upon shelves of wooden crates and ceramic jars. This is the Baharat Odası, the spice room. Not just storage, but sacred space. One small jar sits near the front, labeled saffron, sealed with a wax-stamped lid. You gently lift it. Inside fine crimson threads, saffron, each one harvested by hand from a crocus flower. It takes over 150 flowers to make just a single gram of this stuff. In the Ottoman court, saffron was weighed more carefully than gold, and often stored with locks, guards, and if rumors are to be believed, a backup jar hidden behind a false tile in case of emergencies. Saffron had flavor, sure, but it had symbolism too. Yellow gold rice, glittering with it, was reserved for the Sultan's plate. Guests could eat meat. They could have rosewater sweets. But if you were served saffron rice, that meant something. That meant trust. There's a record of one particular meal in 1580 when an ambassador from Venice was served pilaf with saffron and pine nuts. He left the meeting shaken. Why? Because it signaled either deep favor or deadly manipulation. And in Ottoman diplomacy, Both came on the same plate. You set the jar down gently. A whisper of dust rises, and with it, the scent of centuries sumac fenugreek, dried orange peel cinnamon nigella seeds. There's even an unlabeled vial filled with something deep purple and syrupy, mysterious, and sticky like plum molasses. You want to taste it, but maybe not tonight. Outside the spice room, you pause. There's a bowl of dried rose petals resting on the ledge, curled and dark like sleeping butterflies. The wind lifts them slightly, just enough to release that faint perfume-sweet scent. It catches you off guard. Roses used not for display, but for dessert, for medicine, even for meat. You remember reading somewhere, probably in a footnote you skimmed at 2 a.m., that the Ottomans made rose petal jam not with sugar, but with honey thickened by boiling down grape must. They believed sugar made the heart lazy. Honey, though, honey fed the soul. You walk on, past barrels of vinegar, racks of dried mulberries, shelves stacked with bitter orange peels. And then you see it, a small inscription carved into a wall tile near the exit. It says, "Let no spice touch the pan without prayer." It's not official policy. It's not doctrine. Just a saying maybe scratched there by a bored cook with ink-stained fingers. But something about it sticks. You picture a young boy, maybe 12 or 13, brought in as an apprentice. Eyes wide, hands raw. Tasked with grinding coriander for hours while the master chef critiques the angle of his wrist. He sneezes because of course he does and spills half a bowl of turmeric. The older man frowns, then sighs, then waves him on. But before the next bowl is lifted, he stops him. Say the words, or the dish will turn bitter. And maybe that's all it takes. A habit, a rhythm. Like seasoning the food and the air around it. You re-enter the kitchen through another side door and immediately feel the temperature rise again. Hot, dry. This area is different. There are ovens here, dozens of them. Some wide and low for flatbreads, others deep and narrow, still glowing orange inside like quiet volcanoes. Bread was a cornerstone here. Not just filler. Not just carbs. In the palace, bread was poetry. There were breads soaked in olive oil, breads stuffed with herbs. There was pie, baked for religious festivals and shaped like stars. Breads rolled thin as silk for the ladies of the harem. And even sweet breads, yeasted loaves filled with dates and almonds and dusted with poppy seeds. The palace baked constantly. Over 18 bakers worked shifts that never truly ended. They were part artisan, part engineer. One legend tells of a baker who shaped dough into the face of the moon. When the Sultan asked why, he said, "So your majesty may take a bite of heaven." He was promoted. You brush your hand over a marble slab dusted with flour, still warm, still soft. One of the fringe rumors about this kitchen is that they once baked a loaf the size of a wagon wheel, not for eating, but as an offering. A bread moon meant to float on the palace pool during the spring festival of Hudurellez. Historians still argue whether this ever happened, but if it did, it must have looked like a moon floating across ink. You glance up, and there on a beam near the oven's chimney, you spot a line of tiny paw prints, embedded in the soot. A cat again. Probably Zayton. And you're still here. Hungry, yes, but not just for food. You're hungry for every smell, every story, every moment suspended in the steam. And tonight, the kitchens are still feeding you. You step away from the ovens, your cheeks flushed, and your breath catching slightly from the dry heat. Behind you, the scent of fresh bread fades like the memory of a good dream. Ahead, a new scent rises, sweet cloying, and almost floral, like honey left too long in the sun. You follow it through a narrow corridor lined with closed wooden doors. Only one is open. You pass through the doorway into a space that feels heavier, not darker. There are brass lanterns lit here, but heavier in the sense that everything within seems intentional. No movement wasted, no scent unplanned. The walls are lined with shelves. On them sit pewter trays stacked with fruits that shine even under a layer of dust. You think you see plums, figs, a bowl of golden raisins so swollen they look like marbles. A low table sits at the center of the room, and on it a row of tiny glass bottles, each stoppered with wax and each labeled in faded Ottoman script. You bend closer. The handwriting is delicate, almost shy. You squint and manage to read a few. Sherbeti gül, hurma ezmesi, kayısı yağı, rose syrup, date paste, apricot oil. You're in the sherbethane, the sherbet room, the palace's version of a beverage bar dessert counter and medicinal lab all rolled into one. Sherbet here doesn't mean a scoop of frozen sugar. In the Ottoman world, it was a drink, usually cold, sometimes warm, always fragrant, made from flowers, fruit herbs, spices, and sweetened with honey or grape molasses. Served in carved crystal goblets, passed around on silver trays, it was as common at court as water, sometimes more so. You lift one of the bottles gently and uncork it. The scent that escapes is deep and red, like a garden at night. You don't taste it. There's something sacred about its stillness, but you can imagine how it would sit on the tongue, cooling. Sweet at first, then sharp, then gone. This is where the story turns slightly darker, because sherbets weren't just thirst quenchers. They were medicine. And on occasion, murder. There's a story about a concubine named Lost to Time who served a pomegranate sherbet to one of the Sultan's rivals. Moments later, the man collapsed. Some said it was poison. Others insisted it was grief. But one chronicler swears it was simply too much saffron mixed with bitter almond oil, a combination that could shut down the heart if taken in excess. Historians still argue about the truth. The official record is vague, but the takeaway? In a palace where love and death often dined together, even dessert could carry a warning. You glance at another tray, this one lined with candied violets and rose petals glazed in honey. A sleepy-looking woman in an embroidered robe sits cross-legged nearby, slicing dried apricots with a silver knife. Her fingers are stained dark from plums. She looks up, doesn't speak, then returns to her work. You nod, as if she acknowledged you. She didn't. But something about her presence feels like permission, so you explore more boldly. There's a corner of the room where things are less refined. A bowl of unwashed dates, a basket of quinces so bruised they resemble fists, and beside them, a scroll half unrolled detailing a recipe in looping elegant script. The ingredients include cloves, cinnamon, black pepper, rose, water-powdered myrrh, and something called ashes of dried fig skin. You blink, because yes, this isn't just food. It's alchemy. The Ottomans believed certain fruits properly prepared could treat melancholy cleanse, the blood even protect against heartbreak. There's an old palace remedy made from crushed sour cherries and coriander seeds, meant to cool the liver of fire caused by romantic suffering. It didn't always work, but hey, neither does therapy. You move on, passing a low shelf where glass jars hold dried citrus peels. Lemon, bitter orange, even citron. One jar seems to glow from within. You pick it up and realize The fruit inside is preserved in syrup, so thick it barely moves when tilted. You imagine someone long ago plucking this fruit from a royal orchard, handing it over with a bow, a kitchen girl washing it with water from a brass spout, another carefully peeling the skin, slicing it into spirals, then days of simmering, straining, bottling, until one perfect moment when it's served on a spoon, cold from an icebox to a sultan with a sore throat. That's the thing about these kitchens. They weren't just about feeding the powerful. They were about maintaining them, balancing their tempers, their digestion, their moods, their desires. The cooks were part chef, part therapist, part courtier, and sometimes, just sometimes, part executioner. You take a deep breath. The room smells like clove and molasses and something faintly smoky. You're starting to feel it now, not just the fatigue, but the softness that comes when your senses are filled to the brim. When your thoughts move slower and everything feels dipped in honey, you exit the sherbet room quietly. Even the cat that followed you here stays behind, curling up under a shelf of dates, as if it too needs rest. The hallway opens up again, and this time you're met with a breeze, cool, unexpected, and laced with salt. You're approaching the fish kitchens. It makes sense. The Ottomans had access to 3 seas, the Black Sea, the Sea of Marmara, and the Aegean. Each morning, runners brought fresh catch directly to the palace, packed in wet cloth, kept cool with ice hauled down from the mountains in blocks wrapped in straw. In this section of the kitchens, everything feels sharper. The knives glint like moonlight. The marble counters are cold even through your sleeve. You see a tiled basin where a single mullet lies half cleaned. Its silver scales shimmer. One eye still open, as if in quiet judgment. There's a rack of drying herbs, nearby parsley, dill, mint, and a pile of crushed walnuts beside a jar of thick tahini. This isn't just fish and salt. It's fish with intention. One dish recorded in a surviving palace manual called for stuffed mackerel, filled with fennel-crushed raisins, pine nuts, garlic, and cinnamon, then grilled on skewers made from orange wood. Served with a drizzle of fermented grape must, you make a face. Raisins and cinnamon with mackerel. But the Ottomans weren't bound by modern taste rules. Sweet and savory danced freely together. Lamb with apricots, rice with pomegranate, fish with honeyed onions. If your tongue was confused, they considered that a success. There's even a fringe theory that one court cook, trying to impress a visiting dignitary from Persia, invented an entire course of dessert meat-spiced chicken wrapped in candied eggplant quail, glazed with rosewater goose liver, pâté infused with dried plum and ginger. Historians still argue if that menu was ever served, or if it was just the fantasy of a court poet who dabbled in recipes. Either way, your stomach isn't quite sure how to feel about it. Intrigued? Mostly. Slightly alarmed, but mostly intrigued. You linger by the marble counter a moment longer. The scent of the sea clings to your sleeves. Somewhere far across the water, fishermen are already casting their nets, not knowing where their catch will end up. Maybe on a street vendor's grill. Maybe in a palace feast for a sultan who can't sleep. Just like you. And just like that, you feel yourself shifting closer to the past, further from the ordinary, floating gently through steam spice and stories that refuse to fade. You leave behind the fish kitchens with their marble counters and citrus-laced air, and once again, the palace seems to rearrange itself around you. The light changes. The temperature shifts. You find yourself in a quieter corridor, now the kind that makes you walk more slowly, not out of caution, but reverence. The floor beneath your feet is stone, worn down into soft dips by generations of slippered steps. Overhead, the arched ceiling is low, almost intimate. You can hear your own breath, and then from a doorway just ahead, the scent of roses, almonds, and something slightly burnt wafts through, subtle but unmistakable. This is the Sultan's kitchen. You wouldn't know it from the outside. It's tucked away unmarked. But inside, everything is different. There's a hush in the air, and the people here move with a kind of grace you haven't seen elsewhere. Because this kitchen isn't for the Sultan. It's not even for the court. It's for the Queen Mother, the Valid Sultan. And in the Ottoman Empire, her influence was vast, often invisible, and always formidable. This kitchen, historians believe, was run entirely by women. Female cooks, assistants, herbalists. No men allowed, not even eunuchs. Recipes here were passed down through whispered memory, guarded more fiercely than military secrets. No official records survive. What we know comes from a few diary entries, 1 or 2 old letters, and a scattering of oral histories that mostly begin with "my grandmother once said." You step into the room, and it feels more like a sanctuary than a workspace. The walls are covered in glazed tiles with floral motifs. The hearth is lower, the flames smaller. There's less noise. No shouting, no clanging pans, just the soft murmur of women talking as they stir, slice, and sift. A low table near the far wall is piled with herbs, fennel, thyme, chamomile, crushed ginger root, and something yellow that looks like turmeric but smells sharper. You reach out and touch a bundle of what you think is dried lavender. It crumbles slightly between your fingers, releasing a dreamy perfume that makes your eyelids droop for half a second. One of the women is preparing a paste. She grinds something in a marble mortar, dates probably, or apricots, and adds it to a pan where butter and honey are already bubbling. The scent is intoxicating. Sweet, yes, but earthy, grounded. This isn't candy. It's medicine. Many of the recipes from the Valid Sultan's kitchen walk the line between food and healing. Porridges infused with saffron and anise to ease the stomach. Syrups for dry throats. Lozenges rolled in sugar and powdered licorice root. Herbal stews meant to lift the shadow from the heart, as one early 17th century healer described it. There's one account of the Queen Mother herself ordering a ginger-based tonic to be prepared every Thursday at sunset, to be left in a porcelain cup by her window. Why, no one's sure. Some say it was to soothe her joints. Others believe it was an offering to what no one knows. Historians still debate whether these rituals were medicinal, spiritual, or merely symbolic. But in a palace where silence carried weight and women rarely ruled openly, sometimes a cup of ginger tonic was a declaration of power. You step closer to a second table where a younger girl is slicing almonds with a curved silver blade. She hums as she works the tune, repetitive and calming. Her almond slices are paper thin, falling into a bowl like snow. Next to her sits a small ceramic jar filled with something pale green pistachio paste, judging by the sheen. The women in this kitchen aren't just feeding the body. They're tending to emotions, managing moods, soothing fears, and yes, crafting indulgences that whispered of luxury even in moments of quiet isolation. There's a fringe story, half legend, really, of a dessert known only as Queen's Breath. A rose-scented custard infused with nutmeg served in tiny chilled cups, no bigger than a child's palm. Only the Valide Sultan and 2 of her closest companions were allowed to eat it. The recipe was said to include 1 drop of ambergris, a rare perfume extract made from, well, let's just say it comes from Wales, and leave it there. Some say the dessert could lull even the most anxious soul into dreamless sleep. Others say it was addictive. A few say it never existed at all. But if it did, you'd find it here. You sit for a moment on a cushion near the back wall. The stone floor is still warm. A cat, of course, wanders over and presses itself against your side. This one's gray, with a white stripe down its nose. You name her Safiye, after one of the more powerful queen mothers. She approves with a slow blink. Nearby, a brass pot simmers with a clear broth that smells of lemon and cardamom. A woman lifts the lid briefly, then replaces it with the kind of care usually reserved for something sacred. There's no rush here, no frantic energy, just the rhythm of time measured in teaspoons and tendrils of steam. You close your eyes for a moment and listen the scrape of a mortar, the soft roll of dough under a wooden pin, the quiet laugh of someone remembering a joke only women tell each other. And you think maybe this is what kept the palace alive all those years. Not the politics, not the wars, but the rituals that repeated themselves every day in rooms like this, where someone peeled an orange just the right way, brewed a tea at exactly the right strength, or sweetened a rice pudding with just enough rosewater to make the air shimmer. It's easy to overlook these kitchens. After all, they didn't feed the empire's armies or dazzle foreign dignitaries with roasted peacocks. But they did something quieter, more enduring. They made comfort. You rise again slowly and leave the room with the scent of roses still clinging to your clothes. The cat follows you part way, then turns back, her tail flicking once like a punctuation mark on a soft goodbye. Outside, the corridor feels wider now, cooler. You breathe in deeply, and the last trace of ginger fades from your tongue. You continue your journey, still wrapped in warmth, but now carrying something else too. A gentleness, a memory, a whisper that feels like it belonged to someone else, but now lives inside you. And ahead, there is still so much to taste. You've passed the hearths of empires, tasted rose-scented tonics, and traced the breath of forgotten recipes through silk-draped kitchens. Still, the palace stirs. The night, much like the kitchens, does not sleep. And now your path winds downward again toward something colder. You descend a narrow, stone staircase lit by flickering lanterns set into alcoves in the wall. Each step is worn shallow in the center, smoothed by centuries of bare feet and quiet burdens. The air thickens, cooler, saltier. You feel it in your chest before you smell it brine vinegar and something sharp like unripe plum. You've entered the domain of the tertiucular, the picklers. Welcome to the pickle vaults. You wouldn't think pickles deserve an entire section of the Ottoman palace kitchens. But then again, this wasn't your average kitchen, and these weren't your average pickles. The tertiu served in Topkapi was a science and art, and occasionally a source of minor palace gossip. Here, the room is lined with massive amphorae, clay jars taller than your waist sealed with wax and marked with thick brushstrokes, saramsak. Kavun, lahana, garlic, melon, cabbage. You run your hand along the side of one, feeling the cool dampness of condensation. The lid is slightly ajar, and a vinegary tang hits your nose so fast it makes your eyes water. There's something deeply grounding about this room. Unlike the rose jam whispers of the Queen Mother's kitchen, or the political peril of fish glazed in cinnamon, this room is brutally honest. Pickling was preservation. It was practicality. It was survival. In the long, lean winters, when fresh produce disappeared when ferry boats froze in the Bosphorus, and when the palace gardens yielded nothing but silence, these jars were opened. And inside, sliced turnips, dyed pink from beets, baby melons suspended in garlic brine, tiny green tomatoes stuffed with fennel seed. One of the quirkier entries in the palace's provisioning records, pickled almonds, not toasted, not candied, pickled. They were soaked in a mix of vinegar and green plum juice, then sealed with fig leaves and sesame oil. Their taste was described by one foreign visitor as a confusion of the tongue, which feels like the most Ottoman review possible. You spot a smaller amphora set apart from the others. It's newer, as in maybe only 200 years old, and covered with a silk cloth instead of wax. You lift the edge. Inside are dark grapes, their skin split slightly floating in what appears to be a pomegranate mint vinegar. The scent is disorienting, sweet, sour, a little bit tragic. There's a faint whisper among food historians that one of the palace's more eccentric head cooks created a whole morning pickle menu for post-battle feasts. Foods soaked in bitter elements, unripe lemon wild olives, even seaweed, to reflect grief, humility, or national losses. No hard proof survives. Just a single faded letter from a court poet who described his dinner as a banquet of bitterness, where even the cucumbers wept. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor or menu. You sit on a cool step for a moment and let the silence settle around you. The clay jars stand like quiet guards. You imagine the people who filled them, young boys and old women, bare hands stained red from beet juice vinegar, biting their skin in the cold. They weren't royal. They weren't powerful. But they made this room matter. Pickling was the great equalizer. Whether you were a janissary or a concubine, a vizier or a scullery maid, you ate tertiu. It cut through the richness of lamb. It woke up tired taste buds. It brought back memories of places far outside the palace walls, villages with mulberry trees, narrow alleyways filled with basil and smoke. You rise again and pass down the center aisle. To your left, a cluster of dusty bottles, some labeled with a single word, sirki, vinegar, made from dates, grapes, apples, even honey left too long in the sun. One bottle is pale gold and cloudy with a stopper made from carved bone. You're tempted to open it, but you don't. Instead, you reach the end of the vaults and find a small wooden door, barely noticeable in the stone. You push it open and step through, and suddenly the air shifts again. The brine vanishes. Now there's warmth again. You're in the tasting chamber. It's small. Surprisingly so. A long table sits in the center, worn smooth by elbows and worry. Along the wall, tall shelves hold silver platters, pewter tasting spoons, glass carafes, and chillingly a stack of folded white linen napkins, each marked with the red seal of the Sultan's household. Because once food left this room, it went to the ruler. And before it reached him, it had to be tasted by someone else. Enter the Cheshnijibusha, the chief food taster, part trusted advisor, part fall guy. He was trained in flavor, of course, but also in politics, poison detection, and what to do if he felt a very sudden cramp mid-bite. You walk around the table, imagining the 1,000 tiny dramas that played out here. One taster, one spoonful, one sideways glance. There's a record from 1661 of a taster who flinched after sampling a sweet custard. Not because it was poisoned, but because the nutmeg was too strong. The Sultan, mistaking the reaction for alarm, had the entire kitchen staff flogged. It took 3 weeks for things to return to normal. No one overseasoned anything after that. Historians still argue whether the taster system was more ceremonial than practical. Some say it was an empty gesture, a leftover tradition. Others point to the number of tasters who retired with injuries, missing teeth, or a limp that no one could explain. You stop at the far end of the room, where a small wooden stool sits in front of a window. A silver dish rests on the windowsill, empty save for a faint stain of orange at the bottom. Possibly saffron, possibly apricot, possibly something else. You sit, just for a moment, nothing. He breathes. Some nights, that breath was the most valuable thing in the empire. You get up quietly. Your footsteps barely echo in the tasting chamber. The linen napkins remain folded. The silver spoons gleam like moonlight. And as you leave through the other side, you feel the chill of the pickle vaults behind you and the weight of 1,000 tasted meals beneath your feet. You're deeper in now. Not just in the palace, but in its pulse, its memory, the flavors that built it, the mouths that dared to taste it, and the dishes that said things no vizier ever could. The kitchens are still alive. And you're just beginning to understand their language. The tasting chamber fades behind you, its silver gleam and ghostly hush giving way once again to motion sound and the soft, constant rhythm of water boiling somewhere out of sight. The palace doesn't sleep. It simmers. And now, your feet find their way into the narrowest hallway, yet where the walls curve slightly inward, funneling you into a room that smells nothing like vinegar or saffron or apricot. This room smells like animals and ash. Welcome to the fire kitchens. Or more precisely, the okakane, the meat and flame heart of Topkapi. If the sherbet room whispered, and the tasting chamber muttered, "This place hums," it's deeper than sound. You feel it in your chest. The heat isn't just warm, it's alive. You're immediately struck by the scale. The ceiling is high open in places to let out smoke, but you can still feel it clinging to your skin. Long iron spits stretch across open fire pits, each one slowly rotating something that once walked or flew or swam. You don't linger too long on that thought. The air is thick with the scent of rendered fat black pepper bay leaves and char. Not the clean, sanitized smoke of modern barbecues, but a dense, ancient perfume of meat and wood. Lamb mostly, occasionally venison, sometimes goat, and once camel. That one's true, by the way. Just once, according to the kitchen logs, a visiting prince requested roasted camel. The kitchen obliged after a 2-day hunt, a 2-hour argument over the appropriate spices, and a fire that had to be rebuilt entirely to handle the beast's size. The result? Disappointing. Too tough. But no one dared complain. You walk slowly through the room, weaving between cooks who don't seem to see you. One tends a brazier with a small fan made of palm fronds. Another flips flat rounds of bread on a searing hot plate using only his fingertips. A third slices thin strips of meat from a skewer, taller than he is, piling them onto a copper tray, already heavy with onions and sumac. And in the center of the room stands something unexpected, a cauldron, not for soup. This one is filled with lamb fat. It bubbles softly pale yellow and dangerously hypnotic. You learn quickly that in this kitchen, lamb fat wasn't just an ingredient, it was infrastructure. Candles were made from it. Bread was baked with it. Pans were greased with it. Certain dishes even required the air itself to be infused with the scent of it, which meant burning it in small bowls like incense. It gave flavor, texture, memory. Historians still argue whether the lamb fat ritual was religious cultural or simply a culinary necessity. But the impact was real. A visitor once wrote that the palace kitchens breathe with the soul of the sheep. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. You edge closer to one of the side stations where a cook is carefully assembling something small and intricate. A skewer of minced lamb, sure but layered with dried apricots, slivers of pistachio, and something dark and sticky that might be plum molasses. He rolls it slowly, presses it flat, grills it for just under a minute, then transfers it to a plate lined with fresh mint and a spoonful of white yogurt. The contrast is striking. Fire and cream, burn and balm. You don't taste it, but you don't have to. Your mouth understands. There's a strange sort of choreography to everything here. Not the quiet meditations of the women's kitchen, but a brutal ballet of timing and precision. Flames are fed. Meat is flipped. Skewers are rotated 1 degree at a time. The men move fast, but never frantic. The rhythm is ancient, inherited. At the far end of the room, a narrow set of shelves holds dried meat pasterma pressed between slabs of salt and hung to age in the smoke. A nearby table is scattered with crushed garlic, paprika, dried fenugreek. The scent is overwhelming. You inhale deeply and feel it coat the inside of your nose, your throat, your memory. There's a story here too. A sultan who loved pasterma so much he demanded a version be made for dessert. The kitchen responded with what could only be described as meat candy, thin slices of spiced dried beef, glazed with honey and sprinkled with crushed rose petals. Reactions were mixed. The Sultan adored it. His concubines, less so. The dish was never served again. But the record exists. You circle back toward the main hearth and pause at a small niche in the wall. Inside sits a brass vessel shaped like a pitcher, sealed with wax. A tiny label reads sumac sosu, sumac sauce. You've tasted sumac before, maybe on grilled chicken or sprinkled over hummus. But this is different. Here it's not just a garnish. It's a statement. Ottoman sumac sauce was intense, sour, smoky, fermented, and occasionally sweetened with dried cherry. It was used sparingly, a drop or two on a kebab, a brushstroke across grilled quail, sometimes as a glaze for lamb kidneys roasted on skewers carved from fig branches. You shudder, then smile. This kitchen does that to you. It challenges your tastes, rearranges your idea of flavor, reminds you that food can be beautiful, terrifying, and strangely intimate all at once. You step back, pressing into the cool stone of the wall, just out of the reach of the heat. For a moment, everything seems to slow. The flames flicker softer, the scents blur, and then you hear it, not a voice, not a clatter, a hum. One of the cooks is humming as he works. A low, gentle sound somewhere between a lullaby and a chant. The others don't respond, but somehow they fall into sync. The turn of the spit, the sizzle of fat, the rustle of herbs. All of it begins to feel like music. You stand there, swaying slightly wrapped in the lull of lamb and lemon and smoke. And it occurs to you, this isn't just a fire kitchen. It's a memory machine. Every dish, every burn, every flick of spice was someone's memory once. A summer spent in the mountains, a winter in the village, a feast after a son's birth, a last meal before exile. The kitchen took them all and turned them into something edible. You stay a little longer than you meant to. Your clothes now carry the scent of smoke and coriander. Your mind carries the rhythm of the flames. Eventually, you move on, not because you're ready, but because the palace is calling you deeper. And somewhere beyond this room, something sweeter waits. The door from the fire kitchens closes behind you with a gentle thud, and instantly the air changes. Cooler, lighter. For the first time in what feels like hours, you inhale without tasting smoke. Instead, something doughy, warm, and faintly sweet greets you like an old friend. Bread, not the ceremonial loaves of the Queen Mother's table, not the meat-wrapped flatbreads of the Akakane, but real everyday, endlessly necessary bread. And so, you step into the fırın odası, the palace bakery. The room is long, low-ceilinged, and warm, in the way a blanket fresh from the dryer is warm. The light here is golden, not from torches, but from the massive stone ovens that line the back wall mouths glowing orange, open just enough to glimpse the dance of fire inside. You've never seen so many bakers in one place. Young boys hauling baskets of flour, men with wide forearms slapping dough onto long wooden peels, a woman in a saffron-colored scarf brushing the tops of small round loaves with egg yolk and black sesame. You want to smile. You do. Because this room feels kind. The Ottoman Palace bakery ran like clockwork. 18 bakers rotating shifts to ensure the ovens never cooled, and not just one type of bread dozens. Flatbreads for the soldiers, fluffy loaves for the scribes, twisted braids sweetened with grape molasses for the harem, even tiny star-shaped buns for the palace astrologer who claimed they helped him read the stars more accurately. Historians still debate whether he believed that or just liked dessert. You move closer to a long table where dough is being kneaded in smooth, hypnotic movements. No machines, no mixers, just hands. Strong, practiced, purposeful. And the flour. Oh, the flour. The Ottomans didn't mess around. Palace flour was sifted multiple times, often through silk, to achieve a texture so fine it felt like powdered snow. You trail your fingers along the edge of the table and leave a faint line in the dusting of flour. It sparkles in the warm light like stardust. One baker catches your eye and gives you the faintest nod. Not a greeting. More like an acknowledgement. You are here. You see the work. You step aside as he slides a tray of dough rings into the oven, then turns back to roll another batch. Beside him, a small wooden box holds a strange-looking loaf, dark, dense, and covered in tiny white seeds. You squint. It's chorek, spiced bread, often made with malep, an aromatic spice ground from the seeds of a specific type of cherry. It smells like almond, and vanilla had a secret, slightly scandalous child. You remember reading about it, how chorek was often served during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, or during the Ottoman spring festivals. A bread of transitions, of hope, of sweetness earned. You glance around and realize something odd. There's no yelling in this kitchen, no chaos. Even with fire and flour and sweat and movement, the room feels meditative, like the bakers are praying with their hands. And maybe they are. There's an inscription carved into a beam above the ovens. You tilt your head to read it. He who disrespects the dough disrespects the day. It hits you harder than expected. Because this bread wasn't just fuel, it was ritual. There's a record, maybe half legend, of a baker who accidentally burned a batch of bread meant for a morning ceremony. Rather than discard it, he wept, then offered the loaves to the mosque's poorest patrons, saying, Let this sorrow feed someone else. He was praised, promoted. His recipe became tradition. Historians still argue if it really happened, but you kind of hope it did. You move toward a corner where smaller ovens sit in tidy rows. Here, the sweeter breads are born. A boy, barely out of childhood, pulls out a tray of buns, glazed with honey and studded with black currants. The smell is intoxicating. You ask yourself, not for the first time, how did we forget these flavors? Why don't we still eat saffron brioche or rose syrup biscuits dusted with pistachio sugar? Why did time trim the excess, the poetry, the edible metaphors? Maybe because they required too much attention, too much presence. And modern life doesn't give us that. But here right now, you have it. You sit quietly on a wooden stool near the wall. The air is thick with yeast, cinnamon, and memory. A cat, no surprise, hops onto your lap and curls into a doughy ball. This one's golden, with flour on her ears. You name her Simmet. As she purrs, you let your eyes drift shut for a moment. The warmth, the rhythm of kneading, the soft hiss of fire, everything conspires to lull you. But there's one more story waiting in this room, the Great Bread Riot. Yes, that happened. One day, centuries ago, the palace received a batch of flour that was slightly spoiled. Not visibly, just enough to give the bread a bitter aftertaste. A single janissary tasted it and spat it out. Within hours, rumors spread. Was this poison? Sabotage, neglect? The janissaries, already tense from unpaid salaries, stormed the kitchens, threw the spoiled loaves into the courtyard, demanded answers. And so, the head baker, an old man named Ahmet, brought out his own son's loaf, broke it open, ate it in front of them, then knelt and said, "If this bread can betray, I shall fall with it." Silence. Then someone laughed. Then another. The tension broke. The riot turned into a feast. True, maybe. Maybe not. But the record notes that the next day the flour shipments were doubled, just in case. You rise again, leaving the stool and the cat behind. Your clothes are now powdered with flour. Your hair smells faintly of cinnamon, and your heart, unexpectedly, feels lighter. You look back once. A baker waves a paddle in your direction, like a lazy farewell. Another pulls out a loaf, shaped like a crescent moon, and places it on a cooling rack as gently as if it were a sleeping child. You smile, and then you move on. The palace kitchens are far from finished. There are cups waiting to be filled. Scents still drifting in hidden hallways. Stories folded into stews, etched into spoons, whispered between bites. And somewhere the Sultan is still awake. You think for a moment you've seen everything. But Topkapi is never that simple. Just when you believe you've walked every corridor, tasted every spice, and exhaled every last puff of steam, the palace opens another door. This one is quiet, heavy. You push it slowly, expecting more bread ovens or a silent pantry, and instead you step into a room humming with energy. But not from heat, from buzz, from voices that aren't raised, but crackle with intent, from minds wide awake when the rest of the world is sleeping. You've entered the kavahani, the coffee chamber, and you don't even drink coffee. Or maybe you do, but not like this. It hits your nose immediately. That warm, almost chocolatey scent, edged with smoke, and something faintly spicy. The coffee here isn't the jittery jolt you know from chain cafes and office break rooms. No. This is ceremonial. slow, more like a seance than a Starbucks run. The room itself is low lit and intimate. The walls are lined with wooden shelves filled with ornate coffee cups, each hand-painted with delicate calligraphy and edged in gold leaf. No two cups match. You realize almost without thinking that each belonged to someone different. A vizier, a court poet, a sultan's brother-in-law. The cup was personal. A coffee cup wasn't just for drinking, it was identity. Near the center of the room, a long copper bar gleams in the light of hanging oil lamps. Behind it, two men work with a calm, methodical grace. One is grinding beans, slowly using a long-handled mill that squeaks rhythmically. The other heats a copper sesve over a narrow sand pit, shifting it slightly every few seconds to control the temperature with eerie precision. The sand shimmers. The coffee bubbles. Time suspends. You ease into the room and take a seat on a cushion near the wall. The conversation around you is hushed, but rapid. Men lean in close to whisper across small tables. A scroll is unrolled. A seal is pressed into wax. A joke is told soft enough to make a man smile, but not loud enough to echo. This wasn't just where coffee was brewed. It's where alliances were tested, where poetry was shared under the guise of idle chatter, where traitors were first suspected and occasionally confirmed. There's an old Ottoman saying, "A cup of coffee commits you to 40 years of friendship." You begin to wonder if that was a promise or a threat. The Palace Kavahan was different from the rowdy coffeehouses of the bazaars. No backgammon, no tobacco pipes. Just focus, observation, and cups of liquid so thick they moved like ink and tasted like memory. You watch the barista, though that word feels absurd here, pour the coffee into a tiny porcelain cup no bigger than a thimble. He doesn't glance at you, but he places it on a tray, turns slightly, and sets it before a man in dark robes who's been silent until now. The man raises the cup drink slowly, then flips it over onto the saucer. Ah, fortune-telling. That was common too. Once the ground settled, a reader would interpret the shapes left inside the cup. Mountains meant obstacles. Birds travel. Circles decisions. You scan the room and see another woman, gray-haired, serene, gazing into an overturned cup like it holds a map to someone's soul. It's hard to describe the energy of the room. It's not excitement. It's more like the edge of something. The air before a thunderstorm. The moment right before a secret is spoken aloud. You stand and move quietly toward a back shelf filled with small tins. Some labeled cardamom, clove, mastic salep. Others are unlabeled, just tin and mystery. One is open. Inside is a mix of coffee and finely ground rose petals. You inhale deeply. It smells like a memory you never had. Historians still debate the first appearance of coffee in the Ottoman palace. Some say it came from Yemen in the 16th century, introduced by Sufi mystics. Others argue it arrived earlier, carried by African traders. What's certain is that once it arrived, it stayed, and not quietly. There were periods when coffee was banned. Too stimulating, some argued, too revolutionary. They feared it sharpened minds that should have been softened by obedience. And perhaps they were right. A fringe theory suggests that one Janissary uprising was planned entirely over coffee, that the first call to rebellion wasn't shouted but whispered across a saucer of thick cardamom-laced brew. The theory lacks hard evidence, but honestly, it feels true. You move to another table, where an open book lies beside a cup, pages stained from decades of hands and spills. The writing is in Ottoman Turkish, looping and elegant. It's a recipe, though not for coffee. It describes a blend of spices and crushed almonds meant to be stirred into hot milk and served to diplomats before negotiations. A calming agent, it says, soothing, manipulative, both. You sit again. The cushion beneath you is embroidered with a pattern of tulips and stars. The oil lamps above flicker, and for a moment you swear the shadows on the wall are dancing. This room wasn't just for drinking coffee, it was for deciding things. Over fire, yes, but also in silence. The quiet that sharpens thought. The heat that focuses intention. There's a man beside you, maybe a ghost, maybe memory. He lifts his cup, drinks, and says nothing. But his presence is heavy. You nod at him without meaning to. He vanishes. Just a trick of the light, probably, or the coffee. And now, you realize your pulse has slowed. Not from caffeine withdrawal, but from being present. From letting the hum of old decisions and forgotten fortunes wrap around you like steam. You rise, legs stiff, but mind clear, and slip toward the door. You pause once, look back, and catch the barista's eyes. Just for a second, he nods. Not as a goodbye, as an understanding. Outside the kavahan, the air is cooler again. There's the sound of distant water, maybe a fountain, maybe someone rinsing dishes. You move forward, following the faint trail of something sweet. Not sugar, not fruit, incense. The scent drifts toward you, slowly winding through the corridor like a secret invitation. And just like that, the kitchens call you onward once more. The scent of incense pulls you forward, soft, woody, with undertones of musk and something faintly citrus. It weaves through the stone corridors like a story whispered from one cook to another, impossible to trace to its beginning, but impossible to ignore. You follow. Your steps lead you downward once more, though you hardly notice. The air here is cooler, but not the brisk cellar cold of the pickle vaults. It's a different kind of cool. Still. Stilled. You pass beneath a low arch, and the lighting changes. No longer lanterns, but candlelight, soft golden flickering. You emerge into a room unlike any of the others. The walls are pale marble veined with gold. Low arched alcoves line the perimeter, each housing a single polished vessel or tray. At the center of the room, a great brass brazier stands slowly burning a mixture of sandalwood myrrh and dried rose stems. A subtle smoke drifts upward, curling through the air like a ribbon. You've entered the Ziyafet Odası, the banquet scenting chamber. Yes, this was real. The Ottomans didn't just serve food. They served scent. They scented their halls, their tables, even their guests. A dish wasn't ready until it smelled correct, until the space around it matched the mood it intended to invoke. And this room, this was where the mood was made. You approach one of the alcoves. Inside, an etched silver bowl holds what looks like a paste the color of crushed rubies. You lean closer. The scent hits slowly. Clove, rose, dried quince, a hint of vinegar. It's macan, not the sweet candy sold on sticks in modern markets, but its ancestor, a medicinal paste thick as tar made from dozens of ingredients. Some versions had 40, others 80. No one really knows. Every recipe was guarded like a state secret. Maccan was smeared on plates, stirred into water, dabbed behind ears, even used to scent handkerchiefs. It was meant to invigorate, to protect, to seduce, to bless. Historians still argue whether the macoun served in these rooms was a drug, a perfume, a snack, or some divine combination of the three. There's a legend of a vizier who once requested a banquet in which every course would reflect a single scent. Begin with lemon, he said, and end with smoke. The kitchen obliged. They served lemon-stuffed grape leaves with honeyed vinegar, then lamb in orange blossom syrup, then eggplant charred and brushed with clove, then rice cooked with dried rose and cinnamon. The final dish, a pear poached in smoke, served under a silver cloche. When the lid was lifted, the scent rose first warm, woody, ethereal. The guests wept. You walk past another alcove. This one holds dried petals, violet rose, orange blossom. Next to them, a fine powder, the color of pale gold. When you lift a pinch to your nose, it smells of turmeric saffron and something bitter, perhaps dried grapefruit peel. You imagine this sprinkled across a dish right before serving, not to change the taste, but the air around it. So when the Sultan took his first bite, the flavor wouldn't just be on his tongue, but in his breath, his skin, the very walls around him. There's something so intimate about this. The Ottomans understood what modern menus often forget, that taste isn't isolated. You taste with your eyes, your nose, your fingertips, your memory. A banquet wasn't just a meal. It was an experience, a performance staged across multiple senses, and scent was the opening act, the emotional hook, the thing that made you say, without understanding why, this I will remember. A small copper vessel nearby emits a thin tendril of steam. You peer in and see sandalwood chips slowly dissolving into hot water. This was called buhur, a kind of scented vapor meant to calm the nerves and open the appetite. It was used before formal meals, not to mask smells. These kitchens didn't need to hide anything but to prepare the mind. You sit on a low stone bench. The candlelight plays on the marble walls. The smoke curls above your head like a blessing. There's no food in this room, and yet you're full. Not of dishes, but of expectation. The scent of roasted eggplant, of cardamom milk, of rosewater kneaded into dough. You close your eyes and feel them around you. Meals you haven't tasted, dishes that haven't existed for centuries, and yet, somehow, you know them. It's said that a particular dish was once created in this very palace to mirror the scent of a beloved concubine's hair. The cook was given one strand. That was all. From it, he crafted a dessert of rice, almond milk, crushed violet, and burnt sugar. It didn't taste like hair, of course. But the scent, they said it was uncanny. No written recipe remains, just a line in a letter. She ate it and blushed. He never touched another. Was it love lusto? A carefully timed political move, hard to say. But the dish was retired the day she left the palace. You open your eyes. The smoke has shifted slightly. You're not sure when. The air smells sweeter now. You spot a tray being carried in by a silent attendant, one of those ageless palace figures that may or may not be real. On it are tiny satchels of cloth tied with string. One is placed beside you, inside scented salt. The palace used to place these beneath plates during summer banquets. As the heat of the dish warmed the salt, it released its scent, lavender, coriander, rose, mint, each tailored to the meal above it. Who thinks of this? Who bothers to scent salt? You smile. You're not even surprised anymore. Here, where water was laced with violet, where soup was thickened with quince and sorrow, where memory and flavor overlapped like silk. Of course, even the salt had a story. You stand slowly. The candles flicker as you pass. One snuffs itself out behind you as if bowing. And as you step from the scenting chamber back into the corridor, the smell lingers. You carry it with you, not on your clothes, but deeper, in the folds of thought, in the pause between breaths. This palace doesn't just feed you, it stays with you. The corridor, beyond the scenting chamber, stretches long and cool, as if the walls themselves are catching their breath. You walk slowly now, heavy with memory, your senses still echoing with the ghosts of violet salt and sandalwood steam. There's less urgency in your step. The palace has softened you. Or maybe it has trained you, taught you how to listen, not just with your ears, but with your tongue, your nose, your skin. Then comes the sound, not loud, not even melodic, but distinct. The gentle clatter of plates being placed, the scrape of a wooden spoon against porcelain, and then quiet laughter. You turn a corner and find yourself in a narrow passage lined with curtains. The laughter fades. A door stands ajar. This, you realize, is not just any room. This is the Sultans que just ofrece his midnight table, or more precisely, his 2:47 a.m. table. No, that's not exaggeration. Records from the court diaries mention it repeatedly. The Sultan had a habit of waking in the middle of the night, often before dawn, and requesting food not out of hunger necessarily, but because sleep power and solitude rarely make good bedfellows. You step through the door and into a room far smaller than you expected. No banquet hall, no orchestra, just a long, low table set on a raised platform surrounded by silken cushions. There are no servants present at the moment, but the trays are freshly laid, nothing fancy. Just 2 copper dishes covered with linen cloths. A clay pot of something steaming gently beside them. You sit slowly, as if accepting a long-delayed invitation. The cloth lifted, you find roasted figs. Split open their skins, wrinkled like soft velvet, their insides glistening with honey and crushed walnuts. Next to them, a dish of trout cooked whole, its flesh gently flaking, topped with parsley, lemon, and thin slices of pickled grape leaf. The contrast is striking. Earth and water, sweet and sharp, intimate even. This is not the food of spectacle. This is food for thinking, and perhaps that was the point. Historians still debate what these night meals meant. Some say they were moments of vulnerability, the Sultan removed from the performative rituals of the day, seeking comfort in simple dishes and candlelight. Others argue they were strategic moments of clarity when major decisions were made over a bowl of quince stew and a spoonful of pomegranate paste. There's even a story of one sultan unable to sleep, calling his chief astrologer to the table at precisely 2:47 a.m., a time chosen for reasons never explained. The sultan served him trout figs and sherbet, then between bites asked whether the stars approved of his plan to invade Hungary. The astrologer hesitated. The invasion was called off the next morning. Whether it was the stars or the trout is unclear. You sip from the clay pot beside you. It's warm milk infused with cardamom and a trace of cinnamon. Comfort in liquid form. It hits your stomach with a kind of slow bloom. You understand suddenly why a man burdened with empire might crave this over diplomacy. It's quiet in here. Not just physically, but emotionally. You feel the hush settle in your bones. Outside, the palace might still stir. Someone might be stoking coals, or dicing herbs, or feeding yet another cat. But here time suspends. You reach for a fig and tear it gently with your fingers. It's warm, sticky, and impossibly fragrant. One bite, and the entire day, if it ever was, day melts away. There's something intensely human about this. A midnight snack. A shared table. The knowledge that somewhere, someone else cannot sleep either. Maybe the Sultan. Maybe the baker who just lit the oven. Maybe you. Another record mentions a riddle tradition at these meals. Yes, riddles. A dish would be served, and with it a puzzle. Sometimes verbal, sometimes visual. A plate arranged to resemble a symbol. A sauce drawn in the shape of a falcon. A fig with a secret almond hidden inside. Answer the riddle. You win favor. Fail, you get tea, and not the good kind. You smile at the absurdity and the beauty of it. Imagine an empire ruled by someone who liked his midnight trout with a side of metaphor, and yet it makes sense. The Ottomans didn't divide power from pleasure. They infused politics with poetry and meals with meaning. To dine here wasn't just to eat. It was to participate in something larger. To be reminded, even at 2:47 a.m., that the empire lived in every flavor, every pause, every bite. The walls of the room are simple, but a single tapestry hangs to your left. Woven in gold thread, it shows a crescent moon reflected in a pool of water. Beneath it, a bowl, a spoon, and a fig leaf. No scepters, no thrones, just food. You rise quietly, the fig's sweetness still clinging to your palate. The candlelight is beginning to fade, or perhaps it's your own awareness softening. Either way, the room feels more distant now. Not colder, just done. You pass through the door again and return to the corridor, blinking as your eyes adjust. The passage curves now, narrow, leading downward again. But before you descend, you glance back once more. The 2:47 a.m. table sits untouched. Or maybe it never existed at all. Maybe it was always for you. You descend slowly. Now your body relaxed, your mind pleasantly heavy. Like a nap in progress, but not yet finished. The scent of cardamom still lingers on your breath. The sweetness of figs faint on your tongue. The palace grows quieter with each step, as if it too is beginning to drift off. But your journey isn't over. Not yet. The corridor narrows and then widens again into a chamber unlike any you've seen before. This isn't a kitchen, not exactly. It's more like a museum, but without glass, without labels, without tourists. This is the archive of sauces, and you didn't know you needed this, but now you do. The room is circular, with stone walls lined by shallow alcoves. Each one holds a ceramic jar, a glass phial, or a stoppered vessel, some pristine, others worn with time, their labels faded or missing. You move slowly, reverently, as though you're among relics, because in a way you are. The Ottomans had a language of sauces layered, symbolic, elusive. Not just condiments, but characters. Each with its own mood, its own role in the script of a meal. Most have been lost to time, or worse, simplified beyond recognition. But here in this room, their shadows remain. You stop at a squat jar glazed in indigo. Inside a thick paste the color of dark garnet. You dip the tip of a wooden spoon and smell it pomegranate definitely. But there's something else. Crushed walnuts. Dried mint. Maybe a hint of rose vinegar. This might be nar ekshisi, but older, more primal. It would have coated grilled lamb seeped into the rice-stained fingertips for hours. A note etched into the shelf beneath it reads, "To awaken sorrow." You blink unsure if it's a mistranslation or poetic intent. Probably both. You move on. Another jar, tall and narrow, holds a creamy yellow sauce. The scent is sharper egg yolk, lemon bone marrow. It smells like decisions made in winter. You imagine it served warm over fish, pulled from the Bosphorus at dawn, eaten beside windows, fogged by breath and sea mist. One small glass bottle is sealed with wax and wrapped in silk thread. No label. Just a symbol, a circle within a square. You don't open it. Some flavors, like some secrets, aren't yours to know. And then tucked into an alcove barely visible behind a drape of embroidered cloth, you find something stranger. A scroll. Unrolled it, reveals a recipe not in Turkish, but in Arabic script. The ink is smeared in places, but the ingredients are legible. Fish liver, crushed violets, ground pistachio, vinegar infused with burnt sugar, all mixed heated gently, then cooled and spooned over roasted duck. You exhale. It sounds both revolting and extraordinary. This was a real sauce, called hayalet şurubu ghost syrup, meant to be served only at night, meant to remind the eater that nothing stays, that sweetness can rot, that beauty always fades. Historians still argue whether this was actually served in Topkapi or merely imagined by a court poet trying to impress a melancholic sultan. No physical record of its use exists except this scroll. You move to the next alcove, which holds several smaller jars arranged like a constellation. One smells of musk and vinegar, another of sumac and sugar, a third of toasted coriander and apricot pits. These were not universal sauces. They weren't mass-produced or even standardized. Many were created for a single night, a single guest, a single whim. They were as temporary as breath, and now forgotten. Almost, you sit on a cushion near the center of the room, letting the space settle around you. It smells faintly metallic, like old spices and cooled brass. You can still hear the faint drip of something somewhere, maybe condensation, maybe memory. You think about flavor, not just taste, but emotion. The feeling a sauce can give, comfort, grief, anticipation, relief, regret, nostalgia for something you've never actually eaten. That was the point, wasn't it? To take everything you couldn't say and serve it in a small dish beside the main course. The sauce was the whisper, a fringe theory rarely taken seriously. But you like it suggests that the Sultan's favorite sauce changed depending on what he wanted people to think he felt. Serve plum sauce with goat. He was signaling openness. Yogurt mint with barley cakes. Diplomacy. Garlic and vinegar. Revenge. Was it true? Who knows? But even the possibility is delicious. You rise again, brush the dust from your sleeves, and take one last look around. These sauces, so many of them now extinct, were love letters written in spice and acid, in sweetness too sharp to ignore. You leave them behind, not because you want to, but because you must. Some flavors aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to haunt you. As you step back into the corridor, the air feels different again. Warmer, more alive. You've crossed from the intangible to the immediate, and somewhere ahead, the kitchens stir once more. You are not full, not yet, but you are beginning to understand. The hallway bends once again, and you follow, without question, as if the palace itself is gently taking your hand and leading you to the next chapter. You've gone through fire, through flour, through ferment and perfume. You've tasted memory and silence. But now the air grows thinner. Not colder, just more. Withheld. There's a restraint here. A stillness that feels like something waiting. A narrow set of steps leads upward this time. And when you reach the top, the first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the comforting hush of sleepy kitchens. This is deeper. The kind of stillness that makes your breathing sound loud. You pass under an archway into a room where the windows are shuttered, the hearths unlit, and the copper pots gleam unused. This is the Ramazan mutfakları, the fasting kitchens. During the holy month of Ramadan, the palace followed its own particular rhythm. The kitchens, those sprawling engines of fire and spice, slowed. The flames cooled. And for a few sacred hours each day, the entire imperial machine seemed to hold its breath. The Ottomans took fasting seriously, not just in doctrine, but in ritual, in elegance. It wasn't about deprivation. It was about intention. And nowhere was that more clear than here. You walk slowly through the room, past rows of empty wooden shelves. The scent is faint clove dates and ash, ghosts of meals not yet made. On a nearby table rests a tray of silverware, untouched, each spoon and fork lined up like soldiers waiting for permission to move. You sit. It feels right, and in that stillness, you begin to see what this place truly was. The fasting kitchen wasn't a place of bustle. It was anticipation incarnate. Every dish made here was prepared just before iftar, the breaking of the fast. And everything had to be perfect. Imagine it. The entire palace, thousands of people denying themselves food, drink, even water for hours on end. And then, when the sun dropped below the horizon, when the call to prayer echoed from the minarets, the doors of these rooms would burst open with life. Soup first. Always soup. Usually lentil, though some nights it was almond or chickpea with saffron and mint. The Ottomans believed soup eased the stomach and the soul. Next came dates, then bread, then a progression so delicately arranged it resembled poetry. Stewed eggplant, honeyed rice, roasted lamb sherbet, and on certain nights goulets, a dessert made from thin sheets of rice dough soaked in rosewater and milk topped with crushed pistachios and pomegranate seeds. But during the day, the kitchens waited, just like the people. They prepared in silence, measuring, slicing, praying. Not a single spoon lifted to taste. Not a single sip of broth passed anyone's lips. Every chef, every servant fasted alongside the Sultan and his court. Historians still debate how strictly this was followed. Some suggest that a few cooks out of necessity tasted in secret. Others claim the imperial chefs were so seasoned they could cook blindfolded, let alone without tasting. But most agree the fast was respected, not out of fear, out of reverence. You rise and move to the back of the room where a ledger lies open on a marble counter. The ink is faded, but the handwriting is precise. It's a meal log dated sometime in the late 17th century. A single entry catches your eye. Iftar, third night. Soup of quince and lamb bone. Boiled eggs dyed with onion skin. Cold melon thinly sliced. Pilaf with currants, green almond, and saffron. 1 fig for each guest. No more. Sherbet lemon and honey with crushed mint. Dessert withheld. Palace in mourning. You pause. That last line, dessert withheld, says more than the rest. Because in the Ottoman court, withholding food wasn't just absence. It was communication, an edible signal, a pause that meant something. And tonight that pause carried grief. You step back. Let the silence wrap around you again. It's easy to forget that these kitchens didn't just feed bodies. They managed emotion, joy, respect, grief, even restraint. There's another story that surfaces in your memory, one you're not sure you read or simply imagined. It's said that during Ramadan, the Valide Sultan once insisted on a meal with no fire, no cooked dishes, everything raw, cold, or soaked, dates stuffed with walnut, olives rinsed in rose vinegar, almond milk chilled in snow, brought down from the mountains. She wanted, she said, to feel the stillness in every bite. Her son, the Sultan, joined her. That night, nothing was roasted. No coals were lit. And yet the meal is still remembered as one of the most beautiful ever served in Topkapi. Historians still argue whether it happened, but you like the idea of it. You imagine a room like this one, dim, quiet, filled not with scent, but with potential. A single candle, a single bowl of cold milk, and two people eating not to indulge, but to remember. You touch the edge of the table, and your fingers meet a fine layer of flour, left behind perhaps from dough prepared hours ago for the sahur, the pre-dawn meal. This, too, was part of Ramadan. A soft bread, often with olive oil and sesame served before first light. You imagine the cook who made it, rubbing sleep from his eyes, kneeling by a low table shaping dough by candlelight, knowing no one would see his work, but everyone would feel it. It wasn't glory. It was devotion. You walk the perimeter of the room once more, past trays wrapped in linen pots, stacked neatly on their sides, ladles that haven't been lifted in hours. The silence is no longer empty. It's full, like lungs before a breath. The window is open just a crack, and you hear something outside, the faint call of a distant prayer. Maybe it's real, maybe it's memory, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. The kitchens, even in their silence, speak volumes. And you're learning how to listen. There's something different about the way you move now. Slower, but not from exhaustion. It's reverence. Like you've become part of the palace's rhythm, not the bustling pace of its daytime glory, but the softer twilight version. The version meant for secrets and stories, for flavors that vanish and leave something behind. You pass beneath another stone arch, this one carved with barely visible patterns, geometric stars, tulips, crescents chiseled so lightly, it's as if they were meant only to be felt, not seen. And ahead, a staircase spiraling downward, narrow, dim, worn smooth by centuries of careful footsteps. You descend. The air changes again, but this time it doesn't bring smoke or vinegar or floral sweetness. It's complex, earthy, damp, faintly metallic, and beneath it all, something herbal. You can't place it at first. Then you realize it's time. Faint, almost shy, but undeniably there. You've arrived at the Bache Alta, the garden beneath the kitchens, or rather the memory of it, because this space, buried beneath Topkapi's marble and mosaic, wasn't just a garden. It was a living pantry, a breathing laboratory, a miracle really. And yes, most modern maps forget it existed at all, but the Ottomans remembered. You step through a narrow doorway and into a space unlike any you've seen tonight. The ceiling is low, but arched with small shafts, letting in daylight if it were day. Right now, only moonlight drips through, casting long, slanted shadows across rows of raised beds and planters carved directly into the stone. This isn't a lush paradise. It's something quieter, stranger, a whisper of green in a world of ash and copper. And yet, here it is growing. You kneel beside a row of herbs, thyme, mint, tarragon, all hardy, all thriving in this half-light. Someone has laid stones between the beds smoothed by years of bare feet and gentle watering. No hoses here, no taps, just brass jugs and patience. At the far wall, you spot lemon trees. You blink. Yes, lemons. Short, squat trees growing in sunken pits lined with white stone. The trunks are twisted, the leaves waxy, and the fruit small, round, golden. Not the mass-produced lemons of supermarkets. These are palace lemons, bitter, fragrant, grown not for juice, but for zest, for oil, for presence. It's said that a single lemon rind sliced thin and floated in chicken broth could change the entire mood of a meal. You believe it. Beside the lemon pits grow watermelons, not in the soil on shelves. Shelves, yes, suspended by cords, and netting, the watermelons dangle midair, their weight supported like cradles. The Ottomans believed this helped the fruit grow rounder, less bruised, sweeter. Some were even named. You walk slowly past each one half, expecting them to whisper their names as you pass. Dervish, Moonbal, Yalnızlık, loneliness. It sounds absurd, but then again, you've tasted lonelier things than fruit. At the center of the garden is a stone fountain. Dry now, but once it would have trickled day and night, feeding the roots with cold spring water carried through clay pipes from the palace hills. Around it grow lavender marjoram purslane and something pale and feathery that might be wild dill. You sit on the edge of the fountain and let your hand drift across a pod of basil. It leans into your palm like a cat. You don't know if that's the wind or something older. You remember a passage from a forgotten traveler's journal. He wrote, "The herbs beneath the kitchen's taste of secrets. They are not fed by sunlight alone." He wasn't wrong. This garden wasn't for beauty. It was for power. Real power. Quiet power. The kind that flavors the last spoonful of soup. The kind that makes a guest weep and not know why. A cook once said, "A pinch of the wrong mint can start a war." He was only half joking. Historians still argue whether the palace gardens beneath the kitchens were functional or symbolic. Some claim the herbs here were grown purely for ritual, used to scent rooms, fill sachets, flavor sherbet for the harem. Others argue that this was the emergency reserve, that in times of siege, when the outer gardens fell, this was the last green. You rise and walk to a small wooden cabinet set into the wall. Inside, ceramic bowls, each filled with seeds. Labeled in fading script, black cumin, summer savory, sweet violet lemon balm rue. One label simply reads, "Unspoken." You don't open that one. Instead, you move to the back of the chamber where a stone bench waits beside a tiny window. You sit. Rest your head against the cool wall. The faint breeze from the air shaft carries the scent of thyme and soil, and something more, a memory that isn't yours. You see a woman, maybe a harem healer, maybe a kitchen apprentice clipping lavender in the dim light. She presses it into a pouch of rice and tucks it into a sleeping child's pillow. You see a boy plucking marjoram for his father's stew. He doesn't know it yet, but this dish will be his last in the palace before he's sent to serve at the front. You see a sultan walking here in silence at dusk, fingers grazing the mint eyes, clouded not with sleep, but with dreams of something simpler. This garden is full of ghosts. You close your eyes. You emerge from the garden beneath the kitchens as if waking from a dream. The change is sudden, not jarring, but distinct. The The scent of thyme and whetstone fades behind you, replaced by something drier, sharper. A faint trace of smoke. Old oil. Warmed metal. You're back in motion, guided not by footsteps now, but by hunger of a different kind. Not for food, but for what comes after. The hallway narrows again. One torch, one door. And when you step through, the silence is complete. This is the Karshi Oda, literally the opposite room. A place of transition. A space between fullness and fasting. Between ceremony and stillness. And this room is the last to fall asleep. You walk in slowly, reverently. There's no grand display, no roasting meat or glinting sherbet cups. Just one long, narrow table set for no more than 5. Low stools, a tray of teacups empty, a bowl of ash for extinguishing incense, and at the center a single candle burned down to a stub, its flame barely holding on. You're not here to eat anymore. You're here to remember. This is where dishes were spoken about after they were gone. Where meals were deconstructed not by critics or poets, but by the men and women who created them. The spice masters, the tea brewers, the sauce whisperers. They would gather here not every night but often and speak quietly about what had worked, what hadn't, what had surprised them, and sometimes what had been lost. You sit at the edge of the table. Your hand grazes a wooden tray carved with delicate patterns of fig leaves and almond blossoms. It's been used, worn smooth. You can imagine the fingers that held it oily from walnuts, stained by saffron, trembling from fatigue after 16 hours on their feet. This was a room of honesty, of small truths, of reflection. There's no record of what was said in the Karshi Oda. It wasn't documented. No scribes were allowed. But a few letters survive. Scrawled notes from tired cooks to distant friends. One says, "Tonight, the Sultan ate nothing but melon. We prepared lamb with cinnamon, duck with lime. A pilaf so fine, it steamed like silk, but he ate melon. And I am both insulted and relieved." Another reads, "We burned the onions. No one noticed but me. I said nothing. Then later, the vizier asked if sorrow had been added to the stew. You laugh quietly to yourself. That sounds about right. There's something sacred about the unspoken rules of a room like this. No judgment, no punishment, just shared experience. And tonight, you're part of it. You imagine the others sitting beside you. Not ghosts exactly, just tired artisans of flavor. One warming his hands over the candle. Another removing her headscarf and rubbing the back of her neck. A third sipping cold tea and blinking too slowly. They don't look at you, but you know they see you. And slowly the air shifts. It smells of lemon peel, burnt sugar, cold brass. The last breath of a meal long since ended. You think back to everything you've tasted tonight, real or imagined. Soup that calmed armies, pickles that whispered rebellion, rose syrup custards that silenced queens, pasterma shaped like flowers, spices kept behind locked doors, ghost sauces, midnight figs, and time that still hums beneath your skin. You think about how nothing lasts, how even the most carefully crafted dish is gone the moment it's eaten. The rice cools, the lamb stiffens, the sherbet waters itself down. All you're left with is memory and the scent on your sleeves. This room is built for that. It's not grand, but it endures. A fringe theory found scribbled in the margins of an Ottoman cookbook claims this room existed purely for grieving. Not people, not politics. Dishes, recipes, lost to fire, to forgetfulness, to preference. This was where the cooks held funerals for them, whispered their names, lit a candle, let them go. Historians dismiss it, but you don't. You believe it. Because some flavors deserved mourning. You look to your left and notice a folded cloth on the bench beside you. It's embroidered simple fraying at the edges, but stitched in one corner is a line. Her sauce made men forgive each other. No name, just that. You wonder if anyone remembers her now. You hope they do. You rise from the table slowly, your bones grateful for the stillness, your thoughts thick with remembrance. The candle sputters once, then steadies. As you turn to leave, you feel it. The kitchens have changed again, quieter, emptier, but not hollow. Satisfied. You've walked the pulse of an empire, tasted its secrets, sat at its most sacred tables, and now you're nearly at the end. But one last step remains. You walk back into the corridor. The air has cooled. The scent of food is gone, now replaced by something gentler. Clean linen, cold water, and a silence that doesn't press, but cradles. You pass one final alcove. A man stands there, robes, simple eyes, kind. He doesn't speak, just nods once. A gesture of acknowledgement, of completion. You nod back, then continue into the stillness. You're almost free. The corridor curves one final time, not sharply, but gently, like a spoon carving its way through honey. Your steps are slower now, not from caution or fatigue, but out of instinct. You know where you're headed, though no one told you. This is how the palace works. It never shows you the end, it lets you feel it coming. You pass under a final archway, this one lower than the rest. You duck your head. A soft breeze greets you, cool and damp. And there, ahead of you, daylight. Not full sun, of course. Just a silvery half-light, the kind that filters through lattice and vine. You follow it, and then you're there. You step out into the inner garden, or what remains of it, walled in on all sides by the kitchens you've walked through all night. No marble fountains here, no decorative tulip beds. This is the garden for the cooks, for the quiet ones. It's still dark, but not midnight. Dark. The horizon has begun its slow transformation. The sky, barely visible through a canopy of climbing vines, is the color of watered-down ink. You breathe in, and the air is damp with dew, warm from the walls, and filled with the scent of every herb and flower that lives in the cracks of this quiet place. This was where they came, the cooks. Not during shift changes, not on feast days, but on the in-between mornings, when the fires were low, when no bread rose in the oven, and when the Sultan finally had fallen asleep. There's a low bench beneath a fig tree. You sit. The branches are heavy, not with fruit yet, but with memory. You run your fingers along the wood grain of the bench. It's carved with dozens of initials, some Ottoman, some Latin. A few tiny drawings, a tulip, a fish, a loaf of bread. This was a waiting place and a remembering place. A jug of water sits on a stone ledge nearby. No cup, just the jug. You lift it, pour a little into your hand, and drink. It tastes faintly of clay and mint, not because it's flavored, but because the air around it has soaked into every drop. You think of all the things you've tasted tonight, and then you think of the ones you haven't, because for every dish you were shown, there were 100 more you weren't. Meals lost to time, recipes erased, spices that no longer grow, methods too slow for modern hands, dinners served to one person once and never again. You wonder if anyone remembers the lamb cooked with sour cherries and wild thyme, the rice steeped in almond milk and perfumed with orange blossom, the vinegar and honey sauce drizzled over duck tongues, the soft sesame cakes meant to mimic clouds. You wonder if anyone still makes the soup the Janissaries rioted over, or if it too has dissolved into history. And then you remember the phrase carved into that wooden beam back in the bakery: "He who disrespects the dough disrespects the day." You realize the truth. The Ottomans didn't just cook for survival. They cooked for meaning. Food was communication. A roasted chestnut wasn't just warm. It said, "I was thinking of you." A missing sherbet from a tray meant more than an insult. It was a declaration of war. A fig at midnight could mean forgiveness, and a bread that never rose grief. You let your body lean back against the tree. The bark presses into your spine. A bird stirs in the branches above, half asleep, not ready for morning, just like you. In one corner of the garden is a small stone well, covered, discreet. A basket sits beside it filled with herbs. Not decorative herbs, working herbs. You recognize basil, lovage, maybe a bit of wild arugula. You walk over and see that the basket isn't abandoned. Tucked underneath the herbs is a piece of folded cloth linen stained with saffron, still warm. Someone is still cooking. Somewhere behind one of those quiet doors, a cook is steeping sumac in vinegar, or slicing leeks into rice, or soaking raisins in rosewater, preparing perhaps for the last sahur of the season, or for no one at all. Sometimes the act of making is the point, not the serving. You kneel beside the well and run your fingers across the lid. Cold stone, damp with the breath of the earth. This is where water for sherbet was drawn. Cool, clean, touched only by light and care. This is where clarity begins, and you feel it now. The end of the journey, not because you're tired, though you are, but because everything that needed to be tasted has been. Not every dish, but every idea, every emotion wrapped in pastry, every silence hidden in soup. You return to the bench beneath the fig tree. Sit one last time. A cat walks by gray with one white paw. It pauses, blinks, then moves on. You understand. The kitchens don't need witnesses. They need remembrance. And now you carry that. The garden grows a little brighter. The sky softens from gray to pearl. The first bird calls, not loudly, just a note. Enough to let you know the day has turned. You don't rise. You don't need to. Because this garden, these kitchens, this entire palace, it was never about arrival. It was about motion, about drifting, discovering, listening. And now that you've listened, you can rest, not just sleep. Rest. You close your eyes, and for the first time tonight, you feel full, not with food, with story, with scent, with stillness. The palace breathes one final time. So do you. The sky above you begins its slow, colorless stretch toward day. No trumpets. No grand finale. Just that quiet shift, the kind that changes nothing and everything. The fig leaves above you no longer cast shadows. They glow ever so faintly, kissed by the earliest breath of sunlight. Somewhere in the kitchens, a wooden spoon stirs gently in silence. A crust of bread rises in the heat of a sleepy oven. And the scent of thyme, still clinging to your sleeves, fades softly into the air. You lie back against the bench. The stone is cool now, the kind of cool that asks nothing from you. You've wandered through fire and flower, through lemon trees and candlelit riddles, through vinegar vaults and ghostly sauces. You've sat at midnight feasts and whispered in scenting rooms. You've listened to the forgotten hum of those who fed an empire with nothing but their hands, their patience, and their quiet devotion. There's nothing left to taste tonight, nothing left to find, and that's the beauty of it. Because not every story needs a conclusion. Some just need to be felt. So let this be your ending, not with answers, but with echoes. Let your breath fall gently into the stillness. Let your thoughts soften like dough beneath linen. Let the memory of roasted figs and saffron soup settle in your chest like warmth, not weight. You are no longer wandering. You are no longer waiting. You are exactly where you're meant to be. Now close your eyes and let the last of the palace fade around you. One stone, one scent, one breath at a time. You are safe. You are full. You are home.